From Microbe TV, this is Q&A with A&V. I am Vincent Racaniello, and joining me tonight from New York, Amy Rosenfeld.
Hi, Vincent. How are you today?
Fair to middling day. How about you?
Oh, same.
And for those of you wondering, Amy has 3 layers tonight.
I have 3 layers. Actually, I had 5 because they turned off the steam, which heats the hot water, so there's no heat and there's no hot water. It's all very lovely
What
to
would you
spend.
call the color of gray sweater?
It's actually, yeah, sure, we can do gray, or it's really supposed to be cream.
And underneath is gray also, right?
Underneath is gray plus white plus another gray plus another white.
It's really
Lots of
cold
stuff.
tonight. It's very cold tonight.
Is it? I
More,
can't wait to walk home.
more so than it has been in a few days, yeah.
Apparently, we're having a northeaster.
I don't believe any of it. Let's move on to more interesting things. You can't do anything about the weather, so let's do something about, what is this, a pandemic?
Sure. It's as good a word as any to describe it. Not the word I usually use, but it's as good as any.
I have to shrink this little thing here. I can't see the whole thing. Why not? How do I shrink this? There we go. Okay, thoughts on the EBV MS link.
It's very cool.
So I think we'll do that paper very soon. It's very interesting. Can we use CRISPR to clear EBV?
No.
No, you can't. Could there be bad effects of wiping out herpes virus entirely? That's an interesting question. It could be. Who knows? We've never gotten rid of them, despite Dr. So-and-so's cure.
Oh, the lady who keeps inserting these comments on YouTube and on your blog about that.
Oh, yeah, lots of different people. Dr. So-and-so cured my herpes. Not true. Anyway, the problem is that, what's the problem? Well, herpes is latent in neurons, right? So I don't think you could go into each neuron with a CRISPR and cut them out, right? You think that would work?
Well, it's not integrated.
No, but you could cut the plasmid, say, and
The
delete
plasmid? What plasmid?
the
You mean the
episome,
genome?
the episome, the genome, which
You
is
mean the
episomal.
genome?
Yeah, which is episomal, and you could cut it in a way that would inactivate it. But I don't think you could do that for every copy, right?
I think it's really hard to find a virus that infects, that is non-lytic immature neurons. Neurons are very hard to infect.
True, because they are post-mitotic, right, in part?
In part, but they also have a lot of protection against them. Yeah.
Mm.
Plus, where are you going to target? So you're going to go target all the neurons in the transgeminal ganglia?
Yeah, well, that's the issue, right? You can't. I don't think that would be possible to get them all. So it's easier to put in a modified stem cell, which will then repopulate you. That's a better approach, but you can't do that with this, right?
Yeah.
My 81-year-old father got 2 doses of AZ and a 3rd dose of Pfizer. Should he get a 4th shot?
No.
Sounds like your dad is set.
Sounds great.
Someone said it's this week in eggplant parm. Taylor, why is that?
Because you're always having eggplant parm. It's Thanksgiving. I want eggplant parm. It's Christmas. I want eggplant parm. It's New Year's Eve. I want eggplant parm. It's my birthday. I want eggplant parm.
Oh, I don't say it so much. I said it once at Thanksgiving. That was it.
No, you said it multiple times, but that's fine. Valentine's Day. I want eggplant parm.
Kevin says, is it better for 2 COVID-positive people to isolate alone to prevent increasing viral load? No, not at all. right? Do you think they're fine together, right, Amy?
Yeah, what was the question?
Is it better for two COVID positive people to isolate alone to prevent increasing viral load? Well, if they're already
No.
positive, that's it, right? They're
Yeah,
infected.
exactly. I don't know what they're talking about. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what they're talking about. You're infected. It's not like you get more transformed.
Taylor says, so basically, people at risk for severe disease and death can never go back to a normal existence, even if fully vaccinated and boosted, correct? No, that's not
Wrong.
true. That's not true at all. I think last time we were saying that we had several examples of people with comorbidities who are fine. So it's not a death sentence, right? Because
Not
everyone's
at
different.
all.
And at some point, well, that's a good question. But the common cold coronas don't threaten even people with comorbidities, right, Amy?
Not any more than a rhinovirus. I mean, they're not as dangerous as flu is to people who have comorbidities, and nobody calls flu a death sentence.
Yes. Oh, you know what? I'm going to tell you this, Amy, and you're going to probably get upset. But John Mascola yesterday said, if we were testing for flu and measles and polio, we'd see a lot too, but we don't test for them. Does it sound familiar?
Yeah.
He
And
listens to Twiv, by the way. So he
uh,
must, maybe he heard you.
yeah, probably. So, what was the rocket science synopsis then?
Yeah, we're
I'm not
talking about
clear.
all the cases now that we're seeing. And he says, well, we're testing people who are vaccinated and asymptomatic. We don't do that with any other disease. And Amy Rosenfeld has said that. And this is from the head of the Vaccine Research Center, folks. So those of you that like to get negative on Amy, I don't think you should do that because she's usually right. Most people are predicting subsequent variants will be milder. Has the virus ever gone the other direction to become more virulent? So who's predicting? The pundits? Ignore them. You can't predict what is going to happen. It's not even clear that Omicron is milder because a lot of people are vaccinated. So all the studies are contaminated with vaccinated people. Contaminated is not the right word, but you know what I mean. Since you've been here for many months now, you get it. So, no, I have never observed in humans in the data a virus getting more virulent or less virulent, which is not to say that either could not happen, but I've never seen it. The only one example is in rabbits.
Well, so my problem is that suggests that it's all a viral determinant. It's all a viral determinant. So if I take the virus and I move it from people to people, I'll always get the same phenotype. And that's not the way it works. The host it's a yin yang between the host. And so the host dictates a tremendous amount of how the pathogenesis plays out.
Yes.
So where in their prediction did the host factor come in? Or was that the variable
totally
that
ignored.
Was that the variable? You know when you're doing algebra and you had like AB plus C times D plus Y, and then they said to you, add this other equation to it, and you sometimes would drop out the variable. Mm-hmm. Remember that?
I do.
Like 8th grade math, 7th grade math. Remember that?
Yes.
So it sounds to me like that they've dropped the variable, and like when they turn in their math homework, the answer will be off by a factor of variable dropped.
Look, just like when we were talking about transmissibility and they were ignoring the human factor, and that prompted us to write an op-ed, right?
Well, the lady contacted us to ask us to like give our thoughts, and she said send in any other piece, right?
We should do that, don't you think?
For sure. When my grant finishes.
Okay, so there's another one here. Have you looked at this B2 variant of Omicron? Have you looked at it, Amy?
How am I going to look at it?
That's a good question.
Is it gonna is it gonna be on TV or something? I
Well,
mean,
of course, people are just saying, "Oh, there's this new variant, and we have its sequence, and it seems to be spreading or not." So that's what there is to look at, whether it's spreading in different places. Completely unsurprising, given the number of infections we have had in the past month. Right? We'll see where it ends up. We have to see if it outcompetes Omicron. You can't predict. No one can predict this. I don't care who's on television or on Amy Slavitt's podcast. No, that's not Amy Slavitt, is it?
no, it's Andy.
By the way,
His wife is somebody with an L. Lara, Laura, Lori. I don't know what it
did you
is.
hear who Friedman is having on his podcast?
Who?
Lex Friedman,
Oh no, who's he having on his podcast?
Mark Zuckerberg.
And this is because why?
I don't know why. I'm just saying now I'm on a podcast series with Mark Zuckerberg. That's all.
So, are you disgusted?
I think
Because I might be.
I don't know why. I hope he doesn't talk about viruses because he doesn't know anything about them.
No, maybe they want to talk about like how he is amoral. I don't know what they want to talk about. I don't listen. Lena, yeah, that's right. His wife's name is Lena.
Do you think Broadway should stop isolating for 10 days to avoid more disruption? To stop isolating? You mean isolate, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
That's what they mean.
The vaccinated people are for the most part fine. As we have said, there's no need for vaccinated people to isolate. They can go to restaurants, they can go to theaters, and that should continue.
No, not only that, I believe you went to Broadway. Don't you have to wear a mask the entire time?
You have to show your vaccine thing to get in, and you have to wear a mask, yes. And if you take it off in the theater, they come up and down and shine a light on your face in the middle of the production, which is fine. Everyone must wear them.
And does James Earl Jones' voice as Darth Vader come out and say, "Put on your mask"?
That would be great. That would just be great. I would love that. Noro Vera wants to know, what's your stand on infection-induced immunity? Article.
Well, you get infection-induced immunity for sure. I read the article. He has some good points.
Well, the CDC now recognizes infection as good for 90 days, right?
Why is it only good for 90 days?
I asked Daniel that. He had no answer. He said you have to ask them. Frank is also here. Thank you, Frank. I've thanked the other mods already. So we have Vanity Nutrition, Les, we have Steph, we have Tom, and we have Frank tonight. It's just amazing that you guys all come here to do this with us. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
And they all volunteered.
They all volunteered. And Ian, thank you so much for your contribution. Before we go on, I just wanted to bring up this paper. Okay. It is, let me see if I can, someone mentioned it, so I wanted to bring it up. It is, it's a Cell paper. Multiple early factors anticipate post-acute COVID-19 sequelae. Have you seen this, Amy?
No.
All right, so basically what they are finding is that, let me scroll up a bit. They looked at 200 some patients, 300 patients to see what other things they had that went along with COVID, long COVID. All right, and so here are the four things: autoantibodies, viremia, and comorbidities.
So what's the fourth thing? Autoantibodies, a viremic phase, comorbidities. What's the fourth thing?
You know, there was a list here, but I'm not seeing it now. I don't know why. So autoantibodies, viremia, and comorbidities. Reactivation of latent viruses may contribute because they see like EBV, viremia. Subclinical autoantibodies negatively correlate with antibodies to SARS-CoV-2. And GI pass uniquely presents with post-acute expansion of cytotoxic T cells. So that's interesting. However, I would say that this is an association, right? This is just numbers, comparing numbers. Who got ask and who had what. So we need more work. But it's a start, I think.
Okay, we can go with that.
Study to show Omicron escaped from monoclonals used high-throughput yeast assay and pseudovirus neutralization. Are those methods effective in that proof of non-neutralizing properties? What do you think, Amy?
I'm not sure what the yeast has to do with neutralization.
No.
So it was like they used the yeast to like do a phage display like an ELISA. Is that what they used the yeast for?
Yes.
Pseudotype assay is fine. The lady Hannah Golding at the FDA does it, and so does Theodora. They're fine. They're good.
Pseudovirus is fine, but the yeast assay is only binding, and that doesn't tell you about neutralization, right?
No, I don't have any idea about that, considering the fact I just wrote a paper on that. Nope.
My university, here's Shane, my university is mandating N95s 2 weeks after a booster mandate and mandatory asymptomatic testing for all students. Which Tyvek hazmat suit do y'all recommend at this rate? Indeed.
Personally, I don't really like the puffer hat because it gets cold in there and it messes up your hair. And definitely Vincent's not going to like the puffer hat because it messes up his coif if he does not like a regular hat.
My hair is messed tonight because I just got home and the problem is in the mirrored image of the video I can't get it right, and so it's not straight. I like it to come straight forward. I can't get it. It's fine. So yes, this is all unfortunate, Shane. You realize that we don't agree with any of this, but nobody asks us. Apparently, there are more knowledgeable people running public health in the world. So, I don't know, the 774 of you here, just take that into consideration.
Personally, I like my hazmat suit to be a little large, so I would buy a size extra because I wear a lot of clothing underneath, and then if it's too tight, I can't bend my arms in, so I'm comfortable. And generally, I have to wear it for long periods of time because you can't go in and out. And also go to the bathroom before you put on your hazmat suit and no water.
Well, didn't you have a hazmat suit?
I have boxes of hazmat suits, yes, for when I went to the BSL-3 at Ian's. This is what I learned. Make sure you go to the bathroom immediately prior to putting on the hazmat suit. The puffer, the respirator hat, not so comfortable. Messes up your hair. Oh, also is not good for a ponytail and can make you cold. And if you're going to wear multiple layers of clothing, buy a suit that's one size larger than what you would normally wear so you can be able to move and bend your arms.
That's really a lot of information.
Yes, I'm happy to share my experiences so other people aren't as uncomfortable as I was.
Amy is probably one of the funniest people I've watched. Don't change Amy, okay?
It can be funny.
All right, so Colopy, who is in school, I don't remember what grade.
She's a high schooler or middle schooler whose science teacher was going to turn her into a ribosome.
Oh, right. So, Colopy says, what's the advantage of a virus having an envelope? What do you think, Amy?
It could be enhanced protection. It could be a decoy. It could be a decoy.
I see that there's two kinds of viruses, with envelopes and without, and they both work. So I'm not sure there's an advantage. It's just another thing that works. You protect the genome, the nucleocapsid. You can have spikes in there to attach to cells, but then so do capsids that don't have envelopes. So it's
what
just
spike is on a capsid that doesn't have an envelope? Well, I guess you could call it a fiber.
No membrane. I'm just saying no membrane on some viruses. I don't mean spikes. No.
But maybe it's like a decoy because it's part self. It's self-derived, maybe. I don't know.
Does freezing preserve SARS-CoV-2?
No.
No, we put it in the freezer to store it.
And then when you thaw it, it cracks.
Yeah, right. But the first time you thaw it, it cracks a little, and you still have infectivity. You can't store it on the bench like you do with all your virus stocks.
You can't. You lose more than a little infectivity when you freeze thaw it. You lose almost half, at least. Cracks. It's not so good.
Anyway, it will preserve it to some extent, I believe. An anesthetist was recently seen in a hospital on UK TV telling a politician he wouldn't get jabbed because he already had COVID. That's his or her right, but as we have said before, getting vaccinated after recovering is good. It's good for your immunity. My husband brought COVID to me. Let's say the CDC definition of mild isn't the same as mine. I was very sick for a few days, but even though I'm old, denied treatment.
Yeah, that's the way my parents would have been.
They denied it to Bonnie. She didn't deny it, but they denied it to her. But I don't know why, because Bonnie has underlying conditions.
Well, you have to have specific underlying conditions. You have to be above a certain risk factor. And they have this equation where you have to be above the certain risk factor. And if you're not, you don't get therapy.
Yeah.
A 93-year-old with lung compromise and brain aneurysms does not have the specific risk, is not a high enough risk factor compared to somebody who's 20 years younger than he is going through chemotherapy.
It seems not right, does it?
Well, it seems to be me that there should be no reason why certain therapies still are, while I understand, like for the new novel or new oral therapy that we haven't manufactured at large amounts, I understand that you want to restrict that. Monoclonals that you can make in a biovat, I really have a problem with. There should be no reason why they're restricted.
Amy, what are the top 3 things we have learned from the pandemic that we didn't know previously? Be nice, Amy.
I plead the fifth.
I think John Udell said.
I don't think that I've learned fundamental principles of anything from this pandemic.
Well, she doesn't say she just said things, so it doesn't have to be Amy's got a high bar. She wants fundamental principles.
Well, I don't want stupidity, that's for sure.
Well, I think one of the things we learned, we can make a vaccine in a year. It's not a principle, I know, but it's a thing.
Sure.
And I think next we have learned that mRNA vaccines work really well, perhaps better than other vaccine types.
I don't know if I would say that.
And third, if you give adenoviruses to a lot of people, they will induce clotting in a fraction, which I guess we knew that before, right? Mine are all vaccine related.
Yeah. I'm not so enamored by the vaccine.
Do you think that having a long COVID is a finding? I mean, I think this happens with most virus infections, but just because there were so many people, the signal was amplified, and we see it very clearly, whereas we may not have seen it before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like AFM and other things, yeah.
Joseph says, I need to get a CAT scan. Excuse me. In my lung after having COVID, they noticed a spot. Can COVID cause cancer?
No.
No, COVID doesn't cause cancer. The spot may have been there before.
Well, the spot doesn't necessarily have to be cancer.
Nope.
So when
It
you
doesn't
get
have to
lung
be.
scans, you can have dark spots on your lungs because those areas are filled with fluid or cysts or something else. Or there are areas that are occluded because your lung is damaged from whatever you had. Like I have spots on my lungs that are black because I had a lot of pneumonia when I lived in Montreal.
Are they still there?
Yes.
Wow. Here's one. We get disqualified if our mask is down in track meets. There's also a vaccine mandate. So the vaccine mandate, I think, is fine. I don't think if you're all vaccinated, why you need to wear masks. But as I said, we're not in charge. By the way, I was on a Chinese TV station last night, and of course they wanted to talk about the Olympics in Beijing, and they're
Oh,
going to
the
let
zero COVID policy?
they're going to let athletes in who are not vaccinated. They say you have to have a test 2 weeks before that's negative, but you can come unvaccinated, which I think is a disaster. I mean,
They're being tested every day. They have very stringent policies.
okay, then you're going to turn positive and you're not going to be able to compete. So why not get vaccinated? Well, even that's not going to help because, as we know, people still get infected. So it's a S show, Amy.
Sure. Well, they have a zero tolerance policy, which will eventually lead to an outbreak, and a very large one.
You saw what happened in Tokyo. Huge outbreaks. Many people positive. You can't have that many people together and not expect there to be infections. You're doubting nor'easters. Well, I don't have Amy's thing on. You're doubting nor'easters. No, I don't doubt nor'easters, but what I doubt is all the hype, and you go to the supermarket and there's no milk and bread and eggs because people think they're going to get snowed in. A guy on the train track tonight who might be listening, he said to me, "How long have you lived here?" I said, "My whole life." "When have you been kept inside because of snow?" I said, "Never. It just doesn't happen in this part of the world. I'm just skeptical, that's all. If it comes, it comes." My brother's girlfriend got COVID 3 weeks ago. How soon should she get her first mRNA vaccine? What is the
90 days.
90 days? Yeah. What accounts for variation in virus particle size? For SARS-CoV-2, difference in N protein, inclusion of cytoplasmic goop? That's a good question because coronas are rather heterogeneous in size, right? They're not all the same size. So, Amy, why would that be?
I don't think they have an icosahedral structure underneath.
Yeah, so the budding process is a bit imprecise, right?
Yeah.
But whether it relates, I don't think it relates to N protein because N protein coats
No,
the genome.
I think it's just stochastic. Plus, it probably changes on whether or not what kinds of cells you do it, the tension of the cells, various other things. It's like the
Yeah, yeah.
paper that we read about influenza.
Mm. Here we go. Help. Canada with space doses. Several friends have SOB 2+ weeks out. Many lingering fatigue. Shots sure seem much better. Not sure I understand the dialogue. Do you, Amy?
No.
I'm sorry. If you have to mask, you have to mask. If you don't have to, don't do it. That's my philosophy. When will the COVID pandemic be over? Amy? Amy said 2023 end, right?
Yep.
When will the pandemic of misinformation be over? Never. Never. Despite our efforts at Microbe TV, with your financial support to establish a Center for Science Education, there will still be misinformation because it makes money. It makes money. And folks, since you're 880 of you are here, please give us a thumbs up. It helps us to attract more people so we can stop or at least limit the pandemic of information. Is the spread of a variant just a matter of genetic drift driven by super spreaders as opposed to a change in the virus?
What is genetic drift?
As a virus reproduces, it makes mutations in the genome and they accumulate.
Um,
I
yeah,
understand what he's saying. He is saying, is it just so you have random mutations occurring, and if they confer benefit to the virus in terms of fitness, they will be selected for. And yes, super shedders are going to play a role there, don't you think? Because they
for
transmit the
sure.
most, right?
Well, I don't know what a super spreader is. I know what a super. I mean, how do you know how much you're supposed to spread? How much do you? How do you know what the average amount is that people shed?
You don't. You only know PCR, and that, as we know, is not really
And it seemed right,
a
and it
correlate
seems
of
to me that a
infectivity.
super spreader event is just defined as how many people you can track back to that one event, not a person.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
How can some people have so many close exposures and still not get infected?
They have a robust immune response.
People are different genetically, and they have different immune systems, and not everyone transmits. Also, I think most of the 80% of transmission is by 20% of the people. So, are variant-specific boosters the bridge to the pan vaccine?
No.
I don't think there's going to be a pan vaccine anytime soon. Do you?
Well, define pan. Pan against what? Pan SARS-CoV-2 vaccine or pan SARS-Beco vaccine?
I don't want to put words in Ian's mouth, you know. But
I just
John,
want to know what they're talking about is pan because
yeah, I
I don't
understand.
really,
I understand. I
like
don't know.
today there was a paper in Science Translational Medicine testing a pan SARS-Beco virus vaccine.
Did it work?
Seems to.
Hmm. So John Mascola seemed to think that we didn't need variant-specific boosters unless severe disease starts to rise. So he said they're keeping an eye on that. So, the companies all have them ready.
Pfizer's testing it. Came out on Monday in the Wall Street Journal. I sent it
Yeah.
to you and Daniel.
Yep. Do prime numbers influence fold-ons in virus RNA packaging algorithms? I have no idea. Do you?
No.
No idea. Definition of virus includes often surrounded by a protein coat. So that's my last year's definition, which is not right. It should be surrounded by a protein coat. Because Eugene Koonin told me viroids which don't have a protein coat are not viruses. He defines a virus as it has something having a capsid, an envelope or a capsid. Would you agree with that, Amy?
What does Jens say?
Jens?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ask Jens. I
Okay,
don't know.
well, I'm not really all that interested in Eugene Koonin's opinion.
So anyway, video upload. This year's virology, I say, surrounded by a protein coat. It's a fluid area.
Definitions are sure fine.
Most definitions are
Static.
solid. This one has changed over the years, as you know, because we used to have very small in the definition of a virus, but they're not very small anymore.
Sure.
All right, following last week's TWIV, in your professional opinion, what do you think are the main factors influencing the rapid antigenic drift?
Not what Udell said.
What did Udell say?
I don't know, but I don't agree with it. Plus, I'm not clear that it's actually rapid antigenic drift because if you go back to Paul and Theodora, they tell you that you can find every single variant at the very beginning.
I think the
In
main
the
component.
sequence data in the sequence database. Plus, Udell's answer completely ignored the number of cases, and so the number of cases just by sheer enhances the amount of reproduction and the number of errors that you can have. So it doesn't really say that it's evolving any faster than anything else, because you haven't factored in the number of people or in cases and amount of virus that you make and blah blah blah, right? So it could be exactly the same as flu or the exact same rate as polio, but because you have 400 times more than polio infected cells, it looks fast. Infected people, it looks faster. But going back to the fact that you could find almost every single variant sequence at the very beginning of the epidemic, according to Paul and Theodore in the database, it's again not clear to me how it's evolving.
Well, I don't think they saw Omicron in the database early on.
Well, Omicron didn't have a selective pressure at the time that they looked, and they said it on TWIV. So unless you go back and you directly ask them, don't make a guess.
No, they did not have Omicron at the
You
time where they
don't
said
know
that.
that. You don't know that.
They
You
had
don't
some
know
of the
that because they
changes.
didn't look at that. They
They
didn't
had
look specifically.
They had
So
some of the
you can't
changes.
say things like this. This is what annoys me. You can't make these statements unless you go and either look yourself or ask them.
I think the main driver is error-prone RNA synthesis of all RNA viruses. And then it depends whether the structural proteins can accommodate change. Measles glycoprotein apparently cannot. There's still one serotype and one vaccine still works. So the viruses are different, and that really SARS-CoV-2, it can change in the spike. It's quite clear.
Well, it still doesn't answer the question, but go ahead. Whatever.
What are the main factors
It
influencing
doesn't matter. It
the
doesn't
rapid?
matter.
I think your point is good that so many people are infected. You have to have a
You have to
I don't know.
calculate that into the math, and he did not calculate that
No, I
into the
agree. I don't think you can just compare when you don't look at numbers of infected people. On the other hand, Amy, if maybe we should test everyone for influenza to see how
Sure.
many infections there are out there, right?
Sure. It's fine with me. I don't care. I'm not paying for it. Plus, I'm not doing the assays. I have other work to do.
So Environmental loves the whole channel. I watched the tick show. Fascinating. So I think you are an example of the person who is excited by all the science that we do. And I don't think many people are. I think the people maybe on this stream, the people who, the 100,000 subs, all the people who download. But I think it's not a mass media thing. It's a little bit too intense. So maybe that's one of the goals of Microbe TV, to make some content that's less intense.
Okay. How come you didn't live stream Tweevo today?
We had a guest, and we wanted to focus on him and not answer questions. I'm interested to hear your opinion on SARS reactivating HHV6/7. Do you know anything about what reactivates those herpes viruses, Amy?
No.
I don't think anyone knows what reactivates them. I mean, the best studied reactivation, of course, is herpes simplex viruses, and all the others are really murky. So we don't know, and so it would be hard to say that SARS-CoV-2 would reactivate it, but,
Well, it doesn't seem to be reported. It seems to be that there are reports of shingles. It's not not herpes.
Yes, there are certainly shingles reports, and that could be from the inflammation, right? The stress. Why haven't there been more studies on Guillain-Barré?
How many people have had Guillain-Barré from SARS-CoV-2 infections?
I'm not aware of any. Are you?
No, not really.
I presume that Roberta is talking about COVID related, but it's rather rare anyway.
It's a wishy-washy definition too.
Do you have thoughts on vaccination for under 5-year-olds? Should it be mandatory?
Yes.
Reports a couple of weeks ago, it sounded like an Omicron Delta recombinant. What do you know about that? Possibly
Was
artifact.
wrong.
It was wrong? Okay. Ivada, thank you for your contribution. My dad, with COVID, rarely went out, always used N95, double vax. My mother also got it, so N95 not that safe unless fit tested. And what about ease of contagion on households? I think 95s have to be fit, right?
I believe so. I mean, David Kessler had this whole big thing about N95s and when to wear them and everything. So
What about ease of contagion in households? I don't know what you mean, because we do know that the secondary attack rate of Omicron is higher than Delta. Is that what you're talking about, or the effect of masks? I'm not sure. Where can I find the most trustworthy, comprehensive global data about vaccine side effects? Well, global is hard. So the U.S., well, VAERS is everything that happens, right? People break their elbow and they report it after they got their vaccine. So VAERS is not so useful, I think, because it just is unfiltered. But I don't know any global data where it's put together. Maybe someone here knows. Amy, what's your favorite Italian restaurant in New York?
I like the one that we took Raul to and the one we went to in July.
The one in July was North Italian. What was the name of that?
It started with an R. Radazzo, I don't know.
Let's look it up. Northern Italian restaurant.
Like East 20th. East 22nd.
20. It is Resdora.
Yeah, that was really good. And the one we took Raul to was also excellent.
I don't remember that. Resdora. Ooh, Resdora is awesome. I've been to two Italian restaurants in the last 5 years in New York, so I don't have a big database. Did you see the article, long COVID very rarely resulting from vaccines? Yes, I did.
I saw the title. I didn't read it yet.
I'm worried about how the media will distort the data. I don't know, but it's also infection following vaccination. Is that a different paper?
Different paper.
This is just vaccinated if you get long COVID?
Mm-hmm.
It's quite rare, isn't it?
Yes. But I haven't had time to read the paper. I'm writing and stuff.
Can you tap the mic? You don't seem to be using it.
What are you talking about? I'm sitting right here.
Yeah,
People,
but it should be louder if you're using it, because the echo indicates that you're probably using the computer mic. There you go. That's it.
I don't know. Again, when you come tomorrow and you fix the computer, you can fix it all for Friday.
I thought it was fixed yesterday when I left.
No, it's not fixed.
Anyway, this sounds much better. Thank you. That was Peter who reminded. I knew it was a little echoey. Thank you.
I don't know. It's fine.
It's much better. Much better.
I don't know. It's fine.
No, it's great. My ex-husband asked me to ask you this. He's been told the fourth booster is not necessary because our immune system should be good with just the third. I thought you guys had said this. Yes, we did say it. I don't think you need a fourth booster and more, but don't be surprised if they start recommending them at some point.
The Israeli data did not support it.
I'm 65, got J&J in March, mRNA boosted. Am I good to go?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, in Mexico, due to my age, I got Moderna booster after I got Pfizer. I had no say in what I got, but I reckon it was a lucky combination. I think it's fine. Yeah. Two mRNA vaccines. My husband had COVID, went to the VA, no test, sent home with steroids, got sicker. Well, he was probably early in his infection, although we don't know because we didn't get a test. And this is what Daniel says, don't give steroids early. You'll make the disease worse. So that's really bad what they did. What do you think, Amy?
Not so good.
If the first dose of mRNA vaccine is given 6 months after infection, is a booster needed, and when should it be taken?
No, a
All right.
booster's not needed.
Yeah, in that case, it is not. But you will hear different people say different things. I mean, Daniel says now you should get a booster anyway, but I don't think you need one. If you have infection and a dose, I think you're good because the studies say that. What restrictions make sense when a jurisdiction is at 90% fully taxed, as in much of Canada with varying restrictions nationwide? Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it, Amy? When you have so many infections that you're taxing the system.
Yeah, not so good.
But I told Daniel that, and he said, no, we're professionals. We're healthcare professionals. This is what we do for a living. We can handle it. But I'm not so sure that that's the right.
Well, the lady on Slavic today didn't seem to think it was going all that well.
Why is that?
She's like, everybody has to wait like a tremendous amount, and people they've like stopped in Rhode Island. So she's at a hospital in Rhode Island. She's like, it's basically a disaster. People sit in the emergency room for hours, and they've like you have to have enough nurses. You have to have a certain nurse to patient ratio, and they can't figure it. They can't accommodate that, so they close certain wings, and then they don't do elective surgeries, and it's just an overall not good situation.
The problem is that most of the people going to the hospital are unvaccinated, so the restrictions.
That's not always true.
Yeah, most of
That's
them
not
are.
what she said. That's not what she
Well,
said.
that's what Daniel says. Most of the people are unvaccinated.
Maybe in his hospital, but that's not what she said. She said that many people come in for other things like broken arms, appendicitis, blah, blah, blah. Then they get tested and they don't even know that they're infected.
Right,
And then
but they're not admitted for COVID, though.
some of them are.
Yeah, so that's what Mascola said. He said up to half of the people who are supposedly in the hospital for COVID are actually there for other reasons. And so that
Right.
inflates the numbers, right?
Right.
How can we tell whether a variant persists longer on surfaces than earlier variants? Do symptoms like sneezing increase surface spread over coughing? Curious because I take the subway.
Yeah, well, the virus isn't transmitted by fomites.
Yeah, we don't see very much evidence of that. Just wear a mask. Don't touch your nose and mouth until you wash your hands.
Okay, it's almost 8:50.
When are you going to leave?
Somewhere soon. Somewhere around 8:50, between 8:50 and 9.
Getting flu several times in life, you can get equally as sick each time. With COVID, the belief is reinfections may be milder. What's the difference here?
Variation.
Antigenic variation of influenza, which leads to vaccine evasion and more severe disease. It's very well characterized for influenza. But as we see with COVID, even though there is antigenic variation, you still don't get severe illness with after vaccination.
It's obviously not as diverse antigenically because when you're binding a sugar and two, this is a very specific protein-protein interaction.
Now that I'm vaccinated, is COVID no different from a common cold?
Very much.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is 100%, right? Some people say they get sicker. But for many people, it's a common cold. That's exactly right. Or maybe no symptoms whatsoever. Thank you, Rowan, for your contribution. Appreciate it. All your contributions tonight, of course, go to the maintenance of the incubator and its growth as a center for science education. I don't know this number. What's the mortality rate for fully vaccinated and boosted middle-aged with only obesity? I'm not sure you could even get that number. What do you think, Amy?
No idea. Not even going to venture a guess.
All right, so Bobby is going back to our statement that if we tested, we'd see a lot of polio. Yes, we would. it certainly is circulating here because we use inactivated polio vaccine, which doesn't completely block gut infection and shedding. And so, Amy, remember years ago we asked someone why we didn't look for polio in the sewage here in the U.S.?
I do.
And what did they say?
Don't want to know. Can't explain it. Don't want to have to deal with it. Too much work.
I do not buy a causal link between EBV and MS. There are 2.8 million people globally with MS, whereas 95% of the population have been infected with EBV. Yes, that is an absolutely spot-on point. And in fact, all these chronic virus infections, all the herpes viruses, it's very hard to establish causality because you can't find people without them. I agree. What do you think of that, Amy?
Sure.
Do you know anything about Meatloaf, Amy?
The singer who just died?
Yes.
Just bat out of hell.
Was he a COVID long hauler?
No, he had like a heart attack. He was like obese and he had a heart attack or something. Or maybe that was Bob Saget. I don't know. He just died. Maybe he had cancer. And Bob Saget's the one who had a heart attack. I don't know, but I just know about bat out of hell.
Yeah, he did that.
Yeah, that's what I just finished saying. That's what I know about him is bat out of hell.
You would not be making meatloaf. You probably don't like meatloaf, right?
No, I don't like meatloaf. No
So,
meatloaf.
Amy, how long does mucosal immunity last after infection?
What infection?
Influenza.
Not very long.
A year?
Yeah, probably.
How about rhinovirus?
Depends on what serotype.
27.
And I don't actually know that it's actually that they know how long mucosal immunity looks. They probably looked at serum immunity by IgG.
Problem is mucosal immunity contracts. Sorry for the W word. Contracts very quickly.
Oh, we don't really. You can't really say that because
Someone
we don't
said
really
that recently.
Yeah, but we don't really have a lot of data on it because we don't monitor anything besides serum IgG levels. We don't really do anything about IgA.
Okay, but in general, the mucosal infections are the immunity is less long lasting than viremic infections, right?
I don't know. I wouldn't say mucosal immunity. That's not what I told you, and you repeated, and then John Udell took as his own divine intervention occurring. No, what I said was immunity, antibody immunity. I didn't distinguish between whether or not it was at the surface or if it was serum immunity. What I said was without a viremic phase, you don't get a long-lasting immune response. I didn't classify it as IgA or IgG or anything. I just said you don't get a long immune response. A durable immune response, antibody immune response. Now, in order to ask whether or not it's all IgA, IgM, IgG, you have to do some experiments. And we don't really do experiments outside of serum antibodies. And you know this because we just had the same conversation with Andy McAdam during the NIH pandemic preparedness group meeting when I said something and his response was, well, serum immunity is fine for SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah, the point I'm making, I'm not disagreeing with you, is that in general, mucosal infections provide less robust, long-lasting immunity than systemic infections.
Yes, that's what I said.
Okay, that's what we're saying.
That's what I've all said.
Got it. Okay,
and
now
you probably don't get like good memory B cells and stuff, right?
Yeah, especially mucosal, right? So they're saying that Meatloaf was an anti-vaxxer and he died of COVID complications.
I don't think so. I don't think
Okay.
I don't think that that's correct. We can look it up. I don't think that that's correct.
After vaccination, patient A has a spike result of 0.8. Patient B has 2,500. You're telling me B isn't logically more protected? No. Patient
So
B is
first
not.
of all, while he is dead, it is not clear of whether or not he was vaccinated. He was just against wearing a mask.
Okay. Look at this comment, Amy. If you have higher antibodies, she's saying, you're telling me patient B isn't logically more protected. No. No, you don't
How do
know
I know
because
that those antibodies are neutralizing or do anything?
protected against what, Taylor? Disease?
Well, how do I even know that those neutralizers, antibodies, how do I even know that just because you have high levels of antibody that they're functional?
Exactly. They're just binding assays. The thing is, Taylor, you can get your neutralization against Omicron can be very low, but you're still protected against severe disease. So obviously there's no correlation there. Something else is protecting you.
Well, there was papers that I sent both you and Daniel that talk about the fact that there's undetectable antibodies in lots of serum that come from older people, but they have great plasma cells or memory B cells, and so they're protected. It's so 4 more minutes and it's 9 o'clock. I have to go because I have to do my talks and stuff.
Okay.
At 9, I'm done. But
When can we see one of your classes? Well,
go to virologylive.com.
so there's, I never bought that URL. I should have. That's a good one. Go buy it, Amy, right now before someone else gets it. What?
It's like I should have the so like today you should have the James Earl Jones thingy, and now you want me to buy a URL? What do you think? I'm made of money?
What's the James Earl Jones thingy? I don't know what you're
Go
talking about.
back to the beginning of this podcast. You said
Oh,
something
okay.
that is that like when James Earl Jones says it, and you said
Oh,
that would
okay.
be fantastic.
All right. I've forgotten that already. But basically, Virology Live on YouTube, I did the course. Right now it's at Columbia, but I'm not releasing the videos because it's too similar to the Virology Live. But if you want to come to a class, you're welcome. But I don't think you can. I think you have to be a student because they have to be vaccinated and tested and so forth. But I'll do another live virology at the end of the year. When do you think we will see the Army's vaccine? So I asked John Mascola what other vaccines are going to be licensed, and he said probably two more: Novavax and Sanofi, the two protein vaccines. And that's so he didn't mention the Army. So he knows more than I do. Would have greater transparency with Pfizer and Moderna impeded innovation in these vaccine technological leaps? You mean having greater transparency? No, I don't think so. I don't think it would have impeded anything. And maybe it would do the opposite, perhaps, Amy? What do you think?
Sure.
We fixed Amy's audio.
Well, not to my pleasure, but we will tomorrow.
What was wrong with the mic? Why wasn't it? Was the
I don't
volume
know.
way
I
down?
think the button was all the way down, and there's still like this big like sound vacuum and stuff when nobody's talking that I don't really like.
All right, we'll fix it tomorrow.
And I
Okay.
can't have any complications. He's already said, he wants me early, so we rule out any technological complications. It would be really unprofessional and really disrespectful if I come on Friday and I say, "Oh, can't do this because I have all these technical difficulties. Like I can't launch Zoom because the home disk is too full."
I'll
It
fix
looks
it.
totally
Okay.
ridiculous.
I'll fix it. I'll fix it for you. My 13-year-old stepsister had COVID, and when she recently went and got an antibody, they said she doesn't have antibodies. How is this possible?
Not everybody makes an efficient antibody response that's above the level of detection of the assay.
Yeah, well, the assays are different also. Okay. You want to go?
One more and then I'll go. Sure.
Okay. Is there a chance someone could test positive for COVID if they have the common cold?
No.
Haven't heard of anyone this year who's had the common cold. Could Omicron push out other coronas? Amy,
No,
how's rhinovirus doing this year?
it's back to normal levels.
Common cold, right?
Yeah, it's a common cold. It's back to enteros/rhinos are back to normal levels, and they've returned to their normal seasonal paradosity. So
Yeah, people are probably having common colds and they think it's COVID. But yes, there is rhinovirus around. Thank you, Amy.
well, there's also common cold coronas around, and I'm not sure that they're included in the biofire panel. I'm not sure. You'd have to look at the biofire panel. Enteros definitely, flu,
That's
RSV,
interesting. That's interesting.
para-influenza.
It
I
wasn't on the
don't think
graph that you showed. No, it's not.
No, it's not. That's what I'm going by. So I'm not sure. And then there's all the bacteria like staph and Pseudomonas and stuff or whatever. So, but I'm not sure that there's a primer pair for the common coronas that are in the biofire multiplex.
Mm,
So then you would never know.
yeah.
Because as Paul Offit likes to say, we don't culture anymore. That was only in the days of 1905 when he was training.
No, not 1905. He's not that old.
I didn't say it. That's what he says.
Well, he was joking.
I know he was joking. Not a total moron. I know he was joking.
No one said you're any kind of a moron.
You know, I know he was joking. That's why I was being sarcastic about it.
Okay.
But yes,
All right.
I don't know that it's in the biofire panel. We can look it up.
Okay. Thank you,
All right,
Amy.
I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Let's forge onwards. Truth or dare? Thank you. Oh, recently you discussed the Baylor vax with Daniel. You said you didn't understand why it just focused on the receptor binding domain. Doesn't Pfizer and Moderna? No. Pfizer and Moderna are the entire spike protein, the whole 1,273 amino acids. How many people in the world know how long spike is? Isn't that amazing? Anyway, the RBD is just a part of it, of course, which binds the receptor. And so early on, Pfizer tested two candidates, RBD only and full spike. And the RBD, and they didn't like the immune response in people. So they went with the full spike. I don't think RBD alone is a good idea. I think there are issues with this vaccine, which is unfortunately, it's going to be the vaccine for the world, right? Any country could make it. But, they're not doing a protection trial. They're doing just antibody levels, and we don't know what that means. There is no way you know what antibody levels mean. Okay, I'm sorry. They're just correlations, and if ancestral vaccine protects against Omicron and the serum you get from vaccinated people barely neutralizes the virus, why are they're not going in the hospital? You tell me. It must be something other than neutralizing antibodies. Okay, that's the issue. Do they really have H5N1 vaccines ready? Yes, they do. Well, they've been safety tested, right? In case the virus starts to spread, but I doubt it's going to do that. Andy, thank you for your contribution. I'm an OT in acute care. I've worked every level. Your podcast has been a welcome bit of information. Oh, thank you. I thought you were about to say you guys have said terrible things and stop it. But then you wouldn't donate, would you? I have trouble opening emails because so many of them are negative. And there's the latest ones are stop being political. I haven't been political in over a year, so I don't know where that's coming from. What would prevent SARS-CoV-2 from not replicating if it enters your body? Not enough. If too low a dose and it's overcome by innate immune system, for example, which completely gets rid of it. Or if you're immune and you still have high antibody levels in your mucosal surfaces, it would bind the virus and neutralize it. So all immune-based things that would prevent it from even establishing itself. Yeah, Jeff, we just mentioned this earlier, the high cost of disparaging natural immunity. I mean, I do think that we should have looked into natural immunity and had gotten enough data to say this is good or it's not good. And we didn't do that. And I think that's unfortunate. I agree. So Stair Climber says, making sense is considered political now, Vincent. I see. Well, I just think they're spammers. People like to just say stuff to get a rise out of you, so sometimes I say stuff to Amy to get a rise out of her, right? But that's only someone I know. I would never do it to a stranger online. It just seems inconsiderate. But hey, what do I know? B2 is spreading in Denmark, if I'm not mistaken, replacing Omicron even faster than it replaced Delta. Okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Get vaccinated, you'll be protected against severe disease. What I'd like to know is if no variant had arisen, would this be over? In other words, would no one have any kind of infection, even with low levels of antibody? We don't know the answer to that, but I'd love to know that. We've talked about selective pressure for immune escape, but what about more severe outcomes? Well, it's not with dengue, it's not the virus, right? It's the immune response. With dengue, there are 4 serotypes, and if you have immunity to one and you get infected with another, the memory response to the first serotype binds the virus and lets it get into different cells by FC receptors. Okay, so the immune system is enhancing the disease. It's antibody-dependent enhancement. It doesn't have anything to do with the virus changing. If Omicron moves away fast, could Delta make a resurgence? Well, there are reasons that outbreaks peak and go down, right? Because susceptibles are exhausted. So there's no reason why a different variant would take its place. However, there is Delta. So apparently in China, that's all they have is Delta. So that's interesting, right? Thank you, Jeff, for your contribution. I really appreciate it. As an RN working in a COVID unit, do you think a surgical mask or N95 would be necessary? I was positive 3 weeks ago. Well, I think if you're working in a healthcare facility, you should wear a fitted N95 or at least a surgical mask because you're getting, you are being exposed constantly, right? And most people are not. So I think you're in a special situation. And, infectious disease doctors like Daniel do that. I'm wondering about the scenario of a more virulent subvariant of Omicron. Will vaccinated and infected with Omicron be more protected than people fully vaccinated but never infected? I think the first of all, don't worry about a more virulent subvariant. I mean, everyone's been talking about this the whole pandemic. If you study the history of virology, there's zero evidence in humans for this. So I don't know why it's a worry. Yeah, it's a theoretical concern. But no, I'm not going to say that. From what I have seen in 40 years of virology, you have to go by what has happened, right? You go from past experience, and I have never seen that. Sure, it could happen, but every week people worry about this, but that's a pandemic. Anyway, don't worry about it. I don't think it's a concern. You have to balance your worries, and this is not something you should worry about. Will vaccinated and infected with Omicron be more protected than vaccinated? I think that the immunity is slightly better in people infected and vaccinated. But it's measuring neutralizing antibodies, and that may not be the whole picture. The real question is, how do they fare against disease? And I think we're just starting to get those data. Okay, now I should not really mention this, but we should be listening to billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg. I don't think he is. We need to listen to him any more than any of you. Okay, you have just as good opinions as he does, but he has a megaphone because he's a billionaire. And I think that's unfortunate because the way he got there is quite checkered and he doesn't really know much. So I resent billionaires, frankly. And they ought to give their money to microbe TV, but none of them do. Of course, if I criticize them, they're not going to do that, right? And yes, so they spread misinformation. Facebook is horrible for misinformation. Then they say, oh, but we also spread good information. So if you kill a person and save 2 people's lives, does that make up for it? Come on, give me a break. Give me a break. Triple dosed person gets infected. How much added immunity? I think triple dosed is really good already. But yes, So this is something we've talked about in the last few TWIBs. So you keep getting little infections. What does that do? Your immune system doesn't make every possible antibody. There's no room for them in your body, right? So it has to choose. And how it does that, we're not sure. But there's a limit to what boosting will do, for sure. Unless the virus is really different, in which case you might get different antibodies made. Now, Amy's texting me about her computer issues. That was what that little bing was. Oh, boy. Why does the 5 to 14 have the least amount of total COVIDs? Well, that's a good question, right? Historically, COVID has been less milder in the younger kids, right? The common cold coronaviruses, not COVID, common cold coronaviruses. And the idea is originally that they're infected within the first year of life when they have some antibody protection from their mothers. And so the infection is mild, and then they build up their immunity as they get older. So they have constant exposure and constant buildup of immunity. So they never really get serious disease. But here in this outbreak, we started with everyone with no immunity. And so what did we see? Yeah, the over 65, we had the most serious disease, and the younger kids did not. Why? Well, we don't know the answer to that. Because a lot of the disease is immunopathology, right? So older people are supposed to have senescing immune systems, and younger kids are supposed to have good developing immune systems. So that's not the answer. We don't know. It's a good question. And if anyone says they know, they're not telling you the truth. No. Thank you, Joe, for your contribution. Are reduced hospitalization and death for boosted people due mostly to fewer infections because of antibody titers? I think so, especially if you look within a few months of the boost, right? So we have high antibody titers for a while. But the real key will be 6 to 8 months when they decline. What do you see? The complicating factor is that then you may have another variant. So it's really hard to compare. And that's why the Danish study is good, which is still in preprint, I believe. You know, the secondary attack rate, they had the transition from Delta to Omicron, and you had households that were one or the other, and you could compare at the same time. Beautiful confluence of events, and you could determine the difference in secondary attack rate. How many different proteins do CoV-2 PCR need to confirm present to be considered a positive versus how many PCR amplified? PCR just used 2 primer pairs typically, right? And the antigen tests look for 2 proteins, spike and, say, nucleocapsid. Do you think they will ever consider natural acquired immunity for purposes of being vaccinated? Let's look at it historically, right? Are people who had polio considered? Well, we never had this social situation where immunity is so important, right? But I'm not sure what has happened in the past. That's a good question. I mean, you have to look at measles and polio and other vaccine precedents where you'd say, okay, if you've recovered from measles, do you need to get vaccinated? Well, I never got a measles vaccine because I got measles as a kid, right? And so it's to stop infection in kids. I guess the assumption is I'm immune. So there is, in this little rambling of mine that I'm doing now, there is some precedent for that. So perhaps it will eventually happen. But I think we're going to need some data on how the immune response not only compares, and not just antibodies. I want to know about T cells and other components, but also the longevity. Yeah. Hello, Questella. It doesn't matter because we're still going to go for another at least 45, maybe longer. Now, Questella, you were the one who came, I remember, to the first streams, and you said you're going to pass 100,000 on YouTube, and we were at the time at like 60. So you were right. Thank you. And we just passed 107 this week. Pretty good for geeky science, right? At the big box stores here in Quebec, they have to show proof of vaccination. Okay, so that's fine. Here, it's just masks in the big stores. And I don't have a problem with that because who knows who's vaccinated or not, right? So if they're unvaccinated people, they want them to be protected. Fine. If Omicron has common cold proteins now and PCR detects OMI by these, what prevents? Well, it doesn't have common cold proteins. The PCR primers can differentiate between common cold coronas and Omicron. There's no question about that. So this problem is not an issue. Why did Amy choose virology? Well, so she was a grad. So you do know she got her PhD with me many years ago, right? But she was in another department and was doing not virology. And somehow she got interested in what we were doing, and that was her entree into virology. If she had worked in another lab, she would not be doing virology. So that's what I think, but she maybe say I'm wrong. I don't know. I've heard that the DNA of woolly mammoths has been frozen for 5,000 years is too damaged to sequence. If the mammoth DNA is damaged, would any frozen viruses also be dead, non-infectious? Well, but you can get sequence of things that are older than 5,000 years, right? What is the oldest DNA sequence that we have? Let's look it up. Oldest DNA sequence. 15,000 years old. So it really depends on the sample. So I wouldn't say that old mammoth DNA is trashed. And so it depends on in the permafrost, but we have recovered viruses from 35,000-year-old permafrost, right? Pithovirus sibericum, a giant virus. They thawed out one of those ice cores, Siberian ice cores, and they put it in they put it on amoeba in the lab, and it infected them. And so reminds me to tell you, today I was teaching my Columbia Virology course, and I talked about this ice core. So someone said, well, are we worried that with warming, the ice is going to melt and all these viruses are going to come out and wipe out humanity? And I said, well, we don't know if they infect humans. They do infect amoeba. And then someone said, amoeba are doomed. It was just perfect. It's the kind of thing you see on Zoom. A student would never say that in a class, right? They would never just blurt out, amoeba are doomed. But I wish they would, because I loved it. Anyway, if someone's here tonight from their class, wasn't that cool? Neil Young is pulling his music off Spotify to protest Joe Rogan. Rohan is from Lord of the Rings, right? But what is the connection? Because Rogan is on Spotify? I don't know. Let's see. Okay, here's another one. Rapid PCR. Symptoms, both negative. 12 hours later, the next 3 at home were positive. So there's so many possibilities. So the PCR is quite sensitive, right? So the negative, maybe they had something else, and the 3 at homes are false positive. Remember, one of the at home kits was bogus. It had false positive issues. They recalled it. So the 3, though, is in a row is striking. Usually they say do 2 if you have a positive. You should always do 2, and then so 3 in a row is unless it's defective. That's very strange. Could be that the now if you had symptoms, if it were COVID symptoms, then you should be PCR positive. So my guess is it wasn't COVID and the antigens were false positive. How much has your life gone back to normal? I don't know what normal is. What's normal? I mean, I do the same things I've always done, except more of it. I have just about every hour of the day packed now, and sometimes I don't have time to finish things. Like I have stuff that I'm supposed to do. I have podcasts that have to be edited, and that's the purpose of the incubators, to try and get help, and that will come slowly. But I suppose at some point we'll cut back on the number of TWIVs, right, and do other things. That's normal. I don't know. I go to the lab. I go to the incubator. I go mass transit. So I mean, for the first 10 months, I was here at home, and now so I'm back to normal in the sense that I'm going out. So I feel that everything is normal. The only thing I don't do extensively yet is to travel. But that's mainly because people are not inviting me. But now I'm being invited again for the next coming months, so presumably that'll change, right? I live on a big campus in India. When someone has symptoms, they are tested right away with antigen. Many are negative. Should wait and test again because Omicron can evade antigen tests. Well, it depends on the test, right? So a study was just out of San Francisco, UCSF, where they looked at 700 some walk-ins, and they did both antigen and PCR. And there was a very good agreement between the two. There, 97% of the samples were Omicron, and there was great agreement. It was Binax Now, so Binax Now is fine for Omicron. But I think if you're symptomatic, and you're negative for antigen, you should do a PCR test if you're really in a situation where you need to know. Is the Boston Needle 4 up and operational? Yes, they are doing BSL-4 experiments, yes. And so for those of you who are new to this, we did a documentary on this BSL-4. You should check it out. You could just go to YouTube and search for TWIV needle. And you'll see me and Alan Dove and Rich Condit, right? That was the 3 of us. We took a tour through the BSL-4. We put on the suits. We went in the chemical showers. Very cool. Very, very cool. It's kind of things that you can do on TWIV. Thank you, Rob, for your contribution to the incubator. I have a cold. I've done home tests for 3 days, all negative. I assume I've got a normal cold. Yeah, sounds like it. Colds are the thing besides coronaviruses, right? It could be a coronavirus cold, a rhinovirus, or many, many other viruses cause common colds. Some of us have young children, other parents. Yes, so this is a consideration for sure. So Yes, if you do, you have to be careful. And I understand that's driving a lot of the precautions at campuses, including vaccination has to be done. But, masking, I'm a little doubtful of in a fully vaccinated scenario, unless, yes, the professors have young kids or older people at home, then that's an issue. But I don't know how you distinguish, right? So you have to do the same for everyone. And I forgot what I was going to say. But yes, I totally get it, for sure. Can the nanoparticles in the vaccine break? Then the quality, length of the RNA is affected, leading to undesirable side effects. Well, this has been tested, right? They designed the nanoparticles to be stable for a period of time until they're taken up into the cell, and then they come apart and release the mRNA. So certainly a small fraction is going to break, but the RNA on its own is even less likely then to get into cells. So I doubt there would be any side effects. And my understanding is that the RNA lasts a few days in the cells, and then it's gone. It turns over. It's degraded. Is there any logic or evidence for the argument that repeated boosters could have a deleterious effect on the immune system? So I asked that of John Udell last week on TWIV, who is Friday's TWIV, who is a antibody expert. So he was talking about some of the issues you might get with repeated immunizations, but he said he doesn't think a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th COVID booster would be a problem. So, but I don't think we're going to get to that point. I think one booster is fine. It's not going to, because many vaccines are, in fact, 3-dose vaccines. So I think that's not an issue. Last week, you predicted that COVID-19 would gain resistance to Paxlovid by the end of the year. Okay. So I'm saying the end of the year because that's a lot of time. The first antiviral for HIV, it was resistance within months of its use. So Paxlovid is a protease inhibitor, and it's very easy for the virus to change one amino acid in the protease, make it resistant to the drug, and still be able to reproduce. So that's what I think is going to happen. And we know the virus makes a lot of mutations as it reproduces. We can see this in all the spike changes that are selected for. So the same will likely happen with Paxlovid. And so as now its use is being ramped up, I am sure that we're going to be monitoring resistance. We do that for influenza antiviral. We look at Tamiflu and Relenza and a few others' resistance. They test samples randomly to see the percent resistance, and you can pick it up quite readily. What's the difference between level 3 and level 3 plus? So level 3, you wear a Tyvek suit with a headpiece and a filter apparatus, right? So it's got a motorized filter apparatus in the back with a tube that filters air going into your headpiece. It's a Tyvek headpiece with a clear plastic front. It fits around, okay? And then that's how you work. And the room itself is not the same as a BSL-4 room. In a BSL-4 room, you have to wear a spacesuit basically, which is all sealed, and you have oxygen pumped in from tubes hanging from the ceiling. Anyway, that's a 4. A 3 and a 3 plus, I don't know the exact things that you have to do differently for a 3 plus, but it was devised to deal with H5N1 influenza virus experiments. And so they were being done at BSL-3. It was then thought it's a little bit too dangerous, so let's put in some extra safety precautions, but I don't know what they are offhand. I'm sorry. Is there a concern with timing of Shingrix and COVID? So I think Shingrix can knock you out. Pretty substantial side effects. Some people say they feel lousy for a day. I don't know. I didn't get mine yet, but I would space them out. Get over one before you get the other, just for that reason. I'm going to show you the BSL-4 TWIV. Let's see if we can find the picture. There's a pretty cool picture. There it is. Threading the needle. Here we go. Look at that. Is that cool? So let me get this out of here. Here we go. This episode 200. There is Rich, me, and Alan. That's the needle. It's got a BSL 2, 3, and 4 in it. It's right in the city of Boston, surrounded by a fence and grass. And these are the suits you have to wear. They're all sealed up, and they're airtight. So this is a very cool experience. I must say that the only TWIV could do that. They wouldn't let people in, a news crew for 5 seconds of sound bites. No, we were there for hours, 2 days. We did TWIV and the documentary. Yes, BSL fashion. It's amazing. And then Rich and I, all right, so then I went to Australia, went to Geelong, where there's a BSL-4 lab, and I visited that. I didn't get to suit up or go in, but I was there. I looked in the window and waved to the people, and they wrote on a piece of paper, "We love TWIV." That's Lin Fo Wang used to be there. And then Rich and I went to Galveston, where there's a BSL-4 at the end of 2019, and we got to suit up. I have pictures of that, too. I have a really cool picture with Rich. They had different suits, and everybody has a slightly different suit. Those suits are about $4,000 each. And if you work with animals in the 4, you need a thicker suits because in case you get clawed, right, it won't rip it. So they're a bit thicker. The ones at the needle were thick blue plastic, and the ones at Galveston were a little thinner. I'm sure you don't want to know any of this, but hey, captive audience, right? Is the supply of circulating antibodies partially consumed through exposure to virus that don't lead to infection? Can you deplete your antibodies through repeated low-level exposures? No. John Udell told us we excrete tons of antibodies in urine and feces on a daily basis. So, no, this makes no difference. The virus binding makes no difference to it at all. Does Listerine prevent viral replication after exposure? Well, if you knew, the problem is if you knew the exact moment of exposure and you gargled, you could reduce the amount of virus. However, much of it's already in your nasopharynx up above the mouth, right? Because, in the back of the mouth, there's an air passage that bends up and goes to the nose. So you're not going to get rid of that. So I don't think it's going to make any difference. No. Do we know what mechanism is why some people have more pronounced reactions to the vaccine? Does this say anything about how they would have reacted to an actual infection? No, we don't. We don't know anything because people with otherwise very good immune systems don't have any reaction and vice versa. And there's no relationship to the actual infection. It's a whole different animal on its own. So no relationship between your side effects and how you would do if you were infected. Does Omicron evade antigen tests? Some of them. The FDA has a page where they tell you which tests have been qualified with Omicron and which don't, okay? You can check it out to see which ones should be used. RNA is very sensitive. Well, an envelope, sure, it protects the RNA, but so does a capsid, which is not an envelope. So there are 2 ways to protect the genome. I mean, in both cases, you're protecting the genome, the envelope or the capsid, but to ask for the advantage of an envelope doesn't make sense because a capsid does the same thing. It's just different, right? So, what percentage of medical schools have BSL labs? Oh, well, there are 3 levels, 2, 3, and 4, right? Every medical school has BSL-2 labs. That's easy. BSL-3 is harder. We have 2 at Columbia, and I think, there's one at Rockefeller and Mount Sinai. So there are multiple ones in New York City. So I say big cities have them. Maybe even, Hamilton, Montana has BSL 2, 3, and 4 lab. It's a small town, right? But fewer medical schools have BSL-3. And then 4 is very rare. There are not that many in the U.S. It's prohibited in New York City. It is not prohibited in Boston. That was part of the brouhaha. There's some in Fort Detrick, in Atlanta, in Hamilton, Montana, and a few other places that I'm missing. Not so many BSL-4s. I'm telling you, look at the documentary. The infrastructure you need to maintain that thing is amazing. They have everything backed up. They have 2 or 3 of everything, right? Every part they have backup. So they have extra generators because if the power fails, they have to keep the ventilation going, right? And they have generators, but they have backup huge things, which we saw up in the above the labs in the space above. The pumps, the filters, everything is redundant. Amazing. And everything has to be tested on a schedule. There's just people that do that all year round. Remarkable. I mean, we went to the Needle in Boston. I met with a film crew, or outside the gate, taking cell phone pictures, and the guards come running out. What are you doing? Right? They want pictures taken of it. But then we told them we were supposed to be there, and that was fine. All right, so do you think repeated infection might cause B and T cell depletion? So there's some reports of this now, which are interesting. I'm not sure how widespread this is. Not many viruses reproduce in immune cells. HIV is one, of course. Measles is another, and there are others. But I think this needs to be confirmed and see what's the relevance to COVID. Why are viruses sending mail? I don't know what you mean. It's funny, though. Thank you, Jay, for your contribution. Hope it continues. We'll be here as long as you are here. So I would say I just need 10, 20 people here, and I'll still talk with you guys, okay? So I think probably we'll go on a long time. So it is my intention to get, for a future one of these Wednesday evening, to get Daniel to come on at 7 p.m. for an hour before Amy comes, and then Amy, and then I'll wrap it up, okay? So I'll let you know when that's happening. He's agreed to do that. He's got to come back from Ghana. He's in now. We did an update tonight, and he's already in Ghana. It was pretty good quality, actually. Good internet, but I think he's in a hotel in a big city. He hasn't yet gone into the countryside. Pfizer Omicron booster in phase 1. Get boosted. 6 months. Yeah, you should wait 6 months. That's not going to be out for a few months, at least 6 months. So if you're ready for that 6-month gap, get it. Don't wait. No. What does it mean for a vaccine to prevent infection? It prevents the virus from reproducing in you. So you inhale a cloud of SARS-CoV-2 into your nasopharynx, and the virus can attach to cells and get in and start making more viruses. So preventing infection means blocking that completely. Very hard to do. Most human vaccines don't do that. Human papilloma vaccine is one of the few that does in the urogenital tract. Most do not. So that's what it means to prevent infection. What happens is after vaccination or infection, 6 months later, your antibody levels contract, virus gets in, begins to reproduce. So you're infected. You would test positive. But as John Udell said, we do not design vaccines to prevent positive PCR tests. We design them to prevent disease. So the virus gets in, it reproduces. Then you have a memory antibody response in a couple of days that then starts to neutralize the virus. And then you have a T cell response, which kills the already infected cells. And that prevents you from getting really sick. That's how it works. You don't have to prevent infection. Now, if you get boosted for 6 months, yeah, you're going to prevent infection because your antibody levels have gone up. Not the way the vaccines work. You're not supposed to be boosted every 6 months. What importance, is, if any, is there in the order of authors of a paper? There's quite a bit of importance. So the first group have done most of the work. The ones in the middle have helped them, maybe a little piece here and there. And the ones at the ends usually are the heads of the lab, the principal investigators. Now, in the old days, I published 2 papers with me and David Baltimore. I did the work. David Baltimore was the PI. It's his lab. He raised the money. Okay? Nowadays, you have hundreds of authors. And so there are many co-first authors. So they'll share the glory of being first. But they're not all first. There's only one person who is first. And it goes Rosenfeld et al. Right? So let me give you an example. Here, let's take a look at... I mean, we got the internet. We might as well. Hey, where's my paper? How come it doesn't show up? Racaniello. I spelled my name wrong. Here we go. So, I'm going to share this with you. Here's a paper that Amy has just published in MBio, cross-reactive antibody responses against non-poliovirus enterovirus. This is very important. Unexpected finding. So Amy's first, and then we have Edmund, Michaela, Nishay, Lipkin, and me. So Amy did the bulk of the work. She's the sole first author. Edmund is a Columbia undergrad who has been working in the lab. Michaela was Amy's technician. And then Nishay and Ian are from Lipkin's lab, separate lab, who we collaborate with. So, they contributed a small amount to this. And I inoculated all the mice and bled them. But, I'm last there. So that's how it works. There's not a lot of people on this paper, relatively speaking. So there you go, Hans. I'm glad you like this live stream. Thank you. I enjoyed doing it, even though it's late. And today was a particularly heinous day. Let me tell you what was going on today. First of all, I can't get mail at the incubator. No matter who I call, it still doesn't get delivered. Today, a big package was turned away that I needed. It was a piece of equipment. It's really pissing me off. I call people. I can't get it fixed. Second, I opened a business checking account for the 501c3. I can't deposit checks. Something's wrong. You get on the phone, you're on hold for hours. I don't have time to wait. Third, my camera system was screwing up all day today at the incubator. I was freezing. I was crashing. I don't know why. All of a sudden, I have to troubleshoot it, but I don't have time. So, I'm okay because now I'm doing this, and I can vent to you. If cold cracks SARS-CoV-2, I will try not to mind how cold it would be this weekend. Very good. That's excellent. What happens to the validity of a booster if you develop symptoms or some other infection 4 days after the booster? So if you get COVID, it's just going to be an additional boost to the booster. So it's not going to impede. And I don't think that another virus is going to inhibit, although it could. But I doubt you're going to know this, right? So I think it's a theoretical problem. Okay, so today's Times concludes there are 4 reasons. So first of all, to conclude there are 4 reasons is completely inappropriate. What this paper did was make an association in these 300 patients between long COVID and what they had in common. And what they had in common were, virus, autoimmune response, Epstein-Barr, diabetes, right? It's by no means a proof. It is not right for the Times to conclude there are 4 reasons. It's suspected and we need to do more research. And this is the problem with science reporting. Would either of you go on Slavit or Pod Save America? So Lex Fridman reached out to me because you you people here, someone here emailed him and said you have to have Vincent on your show, and he responded. He listened to my lectures and he said, "Wow, these are good, my virology lectures." So he asked me on. That makes perfect sense. I'd go on Slavit. I'd go on Pod. I actually used to listen to Pod until it made me too upset, and I stopped listening. But I thought, and one of my producers, Ray Ortega, works for ASM, did some work for them. And so it's really cool. I admire what they've done. They make a lot of money, and they are able to do amazing things. And I kind of would like to do amazing things for science education. I do think there should be a Science Save America podcast, but yeah, I go on their show. They don't want me on their show. I tell the truth. Supply is a problem, but early remdesivir ought to be available. I think so, and in fact, now they've lowered the age and weight limit to use remdesivir as long as you use it early. Yeah. I'm still suspicious. It does have an effect on when used early enough, but my gosh, it's hard. It's got to be given intravenously. Did I just do a rant? What did I do? I forgot. It's okay. Yeah, the incubator thing. A part of the reason, it's not the issue. I'm just there alone and I have nobody to rant to. So I get it, you bottle it all up, right? Mm. Other than transmissibility, are there any material differences? Well, some people have said that it seems to be displacing Omicron. It certainly has amino acid changes. I wouldn't call it transmissibility. I would say it's transmitted better, which could be inherent transmissibility or immune evasion. Okay, so it's a little bit semantic, but I've been talking about that for a long time. Does protease begin to cleave as soon as cleavage sites emerge from the ribosome? Well, the protease has to be made, right? So as soon as the protease emerges from the ribosome and it folds, yes, then it can start cleaving other sites for sure. I like mask wearing. I noticed this morning when it was really, really cold on the train platform that, yeah, the mask was keeping my face warm. Yeah. I mean, I do have a hood on, but yeah, it's not a bad thing, right? SARS-1 outbreak was traced to a poor drainage system. Yes, in the apartment complex. And spread there via fecal aerosol. That's correct. The Amory Apartments, very famous in Hong Kong. A guy went there and he was infected, and he visited several times and he had diarrhea. So apparently he was excreting infectious virus. Yeah. And I remember there were some reports on that early on in the SARS-2 outbreak. Yeah. Why exactly are monoclonals so expensive compared to typical pharmaceuticals? Yeah, it's the process of growing them and purifying them. So they're large proteins, and they have to be grown in cells in culture, which is always costly. The cells can vary, but so any kind of large therapeutic like that, a small molecule is a chemical synthesis, right? So this is a biological made in a cell, and it has to be done in big fermenters and purified. So it's hard. It's hard to do, and that's why they're more expensive. Thank you, Lisa, for your contribution to the incubator. Look, Davo, seriously is not needed in this sentence. If we're serious here, okay? We're the virologists, not Andy Slavitt. Vaccinated people get infected. Where are the data that they transmit effectively or efficiently? They transmit to some extent, but far less than unvaccinated people. And so we are protecting unvaccinated people. Why? Why don't they just get vaccinated? Why do we have to protect them? There's no good reason why, unless they have a medical exemption, that they're not being vaccinated. So that's why we say this. So don't say seriously, because we are serious and we're thinking of the science when we make these decisions. I think this was answered, but it's not a virus. Streptococcus. Thank you, Animal Party. Testing. Daniel's faces is considered. Isn't that a reason to test? Look, in certain conditions, you should test. But I think if you are not at risk and you are vaccinated and you're not symptomatic, why are you going to be testing yourself every week? That's what students are doing at universities. Now, if you're going to protect the professors' families, fine. That's fine. And you know, even if 1 out of 10 professors has a young kid or an older person at home, maybe it's more than 1 out of 10, you got to treat them all the same way. You can't be picking and choosing. So I get that. But in theory, you shouldn't have to do that. Thank you, Kat, for your contribution. But I understand the concern. I totally get it. But there are many situations where you don't need to test. So here in my household, there are no old people, unless you consider me old. Technically, I am. There are no kids. There's no reason for us to test if we're asymptomatic. So I don't. Well, my wife likes to test, and I like, what are you going to do if you test positive? It's nothing for you to do. You're not at risk. You don't go anywhere. Daniel said in the last clinical update that data suggests getting vaccinated 30 days after COVID had better efficacy for preventing long COVID. Yes, the frequency is quite low, right? My kids received their first shot January 2nd, tested COVID positive the week after. What's your advice for when to give the second shot? Well, it's up to your provider, right? It's not up to me. But since you have, this is really the first dose. The shot and the infection being so close is the first dose. And so you're going to have to get the second one. Well, it's going to, since you're infected, it's going to be more than 3 to 4 weeks. So at least 90 days. And then you're going to have to get a booster at 6 months. That's the recommended timing. Do you think we will face immunological exhaustion if we continue to vaccinate against it? Well, I don't think we are. We haven't so far, right? I think that we're not going to be doing that. I'd be very surprised. Do you think China will fight? Oh, I think Omicron will get into China eventually, for sure. Absolutely. I'm next door to a restaurant called SOB. Interesting. Someone said SOB earlier. That means something else, right? Recent paper showed cross protection against other coronas after vaccination. Why is the opposite not true? So if you get that third dose, the boost gives you broad antibodies that will neutralize common cold coronas, even SARS-CoV-1, MERS coronavirus. Why isn't the opposite true? Well, we don't vaccinate against the common colds, so we can't test it. We get infected, but they're distant enough. And it's a good question. Why doesn't the antibody response to the common cold coronas broaden sufficiently to neutralize SARS-CoV-2, for example? I don't think we know the answer. There's some T-cell cross-reactivity, but not at the level of B cells. I think they're different. I'm not sure, but it doesn't make sense because the other direction it works. Yeah, I don't know. Can't sleep. I'm so sorry. How heterogeneous is shedding from an individual? Do you shed the same variant or can be shedding different? Well, it depends what infects you, right? I think most people are one or the other. From the Danish study, there were Omicron households? Because there's a founder, right? There's someone who comes into the house and infects everybody else. And that whatever virus they have is what everyone else has. You could have more than one, but I think it's unlikely. You typically, unless you're in a transition period between variants. So now Omicron is mainly the one, so you're not going to have two, right? So it's homogeneous for the most part, I would say. Had my vaccine, including booster, caught COVID. You're really well protected. You are good because the booster is really good, but now infection is great. Fred Murphy's book has a cartoon from the 1800s showing Jenner causing cows to form on people's skin. Yes, I showed that in my virology course. It's been around for a long time. Totally correct. I respectfully disagree with your stance on masks. Do the vaccinated get sick enough to miss work? Not always. They don't always, right? Does masking mitigate infection? If everyone were vaccinated, we wouldn't be wearing masks, right? So we're wearing them for the unvaccinated. That's my point. I don't understand why they have to be protected when they've made their choice. They're saying, I don't care about being infected. With the exception of young kids and older people, it doesn't make any sense to me. Do I like physics and math? I do, but I'm not good at them. I would love to, for example, take a physics course again, but I don't have time. I'm devoted to viruses. I think they're great, and I love Feynman's lectures. It's great. I love when math is demonstrated and it's beautiful. So yes, I do, but I'm not very good at either. Just like histone shield DNA, splicing enzymes could be associated with peripherally positioned RNA containing lipid droplets. Go in the ER and Golgi. I'm not sure what you're referring to, CRISPR. I'm sorry. What was the basis of the assumption the virus would be slow to mutate? Oh, so the original basis was at the outset of the pandemic, nobody had ever observed coronavirus variation before because no one looked. And so people looked at the common cold coronas. Jesse Bloom's lab looked and found variation. And then after mid-2020, boom, did we see SARS-CoV-2 beginning to vary as soon as it infected a lot of people. So the assumption was that it didn't happen. So now we know we were wrong. I live in the lowest vaccinated county in New York. When we have the highest pluses, when I go out, I wear a mask. I'm 3 times vaccinated. I think it's prudent. You can do what you want. You can say it's prudent. I wear a mask because I have to. When I go out, I'm going to the train. And the trains that I take, I have to wear a mask. I get to my office, I take it off. I go to restaurants, I take it off to eat. So what is it that you can go to a restaurant full of people who don't have masks, and that's fine because it's eating, but everywhere else it's not? That doesn't make any sense. They're all vaccinated, right, to get in a restaurant in New York City. Can EBV reactivate years? Yes. It can. So you get infected in your young years and then periodically reactivate for the rest of your life. It never goes away. Unlike love, herpes is forever. We need Amy and John on the same Twitter. I don't know if I could handle it. Enough said. I am masking because I haven't had bronchitis since I started, and it used to be an annual fun fest. I've heard that from many people. And I think that if you want to mask for a variety of reasons, it's fine. But I think the mandating is not really useful at this point. Why? Because we have vaccines, and those vaccines are not going to change in the near future. And the only difference is we only have 63% of people vaccinated in the U.S. And if we had 80% and hardly any cases, we wouldn't be masking. So you figure it out. I heard another expert say Omicron was from Wuhan. No, not at all. Don't you know that it might have come from mice? There's some suggestion that it might come from mice. So we're going to have Nels Elde on TWIV next week to talk about the mouse. There was a science paper suggesting Omicron originated in mice. We're going to have him come on. Hayden, thank you for your contribution. Appreciate it. I think testing everyone for flu and RSV would be a good idea. Why don't we test everyone for everything that we vaccinate against, and let's see what happens, right? Let's do it on a monthly basis. We don't test for anything except a little bit of flu and now COVID, right? But I'm sure there's more. As John Mascola said on TWIV this week, there's plenty of these other viruses circulating that we don't know about. Thank you, Enrico. Active infection of PBMCs. Well, it depends on, well, first of all, I don't know how widespread it is. And it depends on the extent of it, right? Because with HIV, you get progressively more and more killing of CD4 cells, right? In the beginning, they regenerate. But COVID is an acute infection. So I'm just not sure what it... You can... For HIV, you can sustain a lot of CD4 killing for a long period of time until you go into AIDS. So, and that's years. So I'm just not sure what difference it would make to the pathogenesis of COVID. Don't dumb things down in the incubator. I think the most successful popular science assumes an informed audience. Yeah, it's what I know. That's what we've always done, but we don't have much of a reach. So should I care? That's the question. I just want to keep the incubator going. That's all. So I don't need to have millions of people listening. But what ticks me off are people who know nothing, who have millions of followers, and they're talking about COVID, right? And you know who we're talking about. So should I just not worry about it? If kids got one COVID vaccine and then got COVID, do they still need the second dose? If you're sure they got COVID, then a second dose is not going to help that much, according to the data, although it's not in that age group. That's the only caveat there. Yeah. At my medium-sized hospital, we have seen 2 Guillain-Barré post-COVID and 1 post-vaccine. Fewer per positive cases than with a bad flu, right? Flu is a common Guillain-Barré inducer. That's right. Boosted and caught COVID 3 weeks ago. What would have to change to get another vaccine? The percentage of hospitalization goes up, you know, in people like you who have been fully vaccinated, which hasn't done really substantially yet. Did I end up emailing Lex about interviewing the anti-vax lunatics? I did not. I have a whole list of things I should do and I don't get to because I just aren't enough hours in a day. And unfortunately, I don't stay up all night. Maybe, I mean, you know, some mornings I can't sleep, so I get up at 4:30 or 5 and get some extra stuff done. But most of the time, I need to get a little sleep. I know some people can go without much sleep, but I can't. So I have to, that limits the hours. Boy, I wish I didn't have to sleep. I could get so much done. Don't worry, I'm not going to change TWIV. I'm just saying I'm making other programs that would be more accessible, right? I don't know that I would actually do it because I'm not sure I have the time. But if someone joined me who wanted to do it, I would say, sure, try it. I wouldn't be on it, though. Yeah, so Resdora. Yeah. I've only been once, but it's really good. Should go. Has childhood lack of temperance and abundance of ACE2 been ruled out? I don't believe so. I don't believe that has been ruled out, no. All right, 10:05. Should we keep going? Actually, I should ask the mods. They probably will say that's enough. Hello from the mountains of West Virginia. Cases have plateaued. Good. In many places, they seem to have plateaued, which is good. They will go down for a while. Whether they go up again and when depends on how many people are immune, right? So John Mascola estimated that maybe 80% of the U.S. is immune in some way. And, of course, in the spring, then students go home and they bring virus with them. So we'll have another round of explosions, I'm quite sure. And whether there's another variant, who knows? All right, so we're getting yes to keep going. All right, I'll go to 10:30. No problem. So I got today I gave a lecture in my virology course, and I got the video rendering out here, and I actually posted it while I was talking to you guys to try and get that done. And never mind. Imagine polio vaccine would have the same efficacy of polio transmission and infection as COVID. What would your comment be? Well, it depends what polio vaccine you're talking about. So the inactivated polio vaccine, Salk, which we use in the U.S. and in a number of other countries, does not immunize your gut, so you can be infected and shed virus in the stool. And I think there's probably a lot of virus in the U.S. because of that, because it's imported from a few other countries. So IPV does not block transmission. Oral polio vaccine is a little better. It does immunize the gut, and it drops transmission substantially. It doesn't eliminate it completely, but what it does is replace. You shed vaccine virus, which has reverted, and that replaces the wild type virus in the population. So neither technically inhibit shedding, although one is the vaccine that's being shed, right? If a person is COVID positive, they have to be treated like a patient, which puts greater pressure on hospital resources. So the problem is that if they're positive by PCR, they could be completely not transmitting, right? If their CT is above 30, they're not shedding infectious virus, yet they're all treated the same. And I think that's a failing of the system. You really should give CT values, and whoever's in charge of the patient say, okay, this is higher than 30. You can go about your life. You're not going to infect anyone. Right now, you're all treated similarly, which is not good, right? Considering going back to the gym, boosted 3 months ago, 11% positivity, age 65, N95. Yeah, no, go. There's no downside to going. You'll feel better if you go to the gym. I mean, I think these normal things help us a lot. And the more we don't have them, the more we have bigger population issues, right? If Omicron spike is not included, how the booster with the same vaccine would even possible to make more antibodies to Omicron? Well, that's the beauty of the immune system, right? When what you have tons and tons of antibodies in you that recognize billions of different epitopes. It's all a matter of getting them out. And so when you get 2 doses in a boost, what you're doing is allowing full expression of antibody response, and it's maturing, and it's making antibodies that recognize things it's never seen. You can make antibodies against a synthetic compound that was made in a lab which doesn't exist in nature. Your body can make antibodies against it. That's how powerful the immune system is. So the mRNA vaccines are inducing antibodies with the 3 doses against all the variants and many other coronas, which is quite remarkable. The same thing doesn't happen with influenza, obviously. So that vaccine is not as good at inducing all those antibodies. So that's what happens there. Elise, thank you for your contribution. If more people understood how dumb and wrong it is to give steroids in the first few days of most acute infections, there would be a ton of lawsuits in the coming year or so with all this sloppy prescribing. Yeah, it's kind of scary, right? That people still do that. How are monoclonal antibodies made? So nowadays, what they will do is take B cells from a patient who, say, has recovered or been vaccinated, and they will look for antibodies. They will look for single B cells that bind, say, spike, and then they will clone out the genes, make the antibodies in cells in culture, confirm that they neutralize infection. They will test hundreds and hundreds of antibodies that way and pick a few that have different targets that are very efficient at neutralizing, and then propagate those in big fermenters and, many, many thousands of liter cultures, and then purified and then checked and given to people. Is an mRNA vaccine designed to change the DNA in our cells so that they produce a spike similar to the corona? No, it doesn't change the DNA at all. The mRNA just goes into the cytoplasm and is engaged by ribosomes, which then make the protein that's encoded in that mRNA. The mRNA doesn't go near the nucleus. It's not converted to DNA, so it only lasts a few days at the most, and then it's degraded, and that's the end of that. So, the concern about it is really unfounded. I would say, if you're concerned, pick something that's valid to be concerned about, not something that is not happening. What's the state of knowledge about HLA? Histocompatibility and the immune response. So, the GWAS studies show some HLA associations, but I'm not sure we have the final say on that yet. I think it's still early. Yeah. Yes, Amy is in the midst of writing a grant. It's due February 5th. So it's a very stressful time. Yeah. Now that I'm infected, should I get the booster? Well, if you haven't had a vaccine, recover from infection, then get a single boost, and you'll have amazing immunity, better than most people on the planet. Yeah. Where did we get educated? So I went to Cornell as an undergrad, and then I went to Mount Sinai in New York for my PhD, and then I did a postdoc at MIT with David Baltimore. Amy was an undergrad at Emory and got her PhD at Columbia with me. Dr. Fauci said this morning that the pan-corona vaccine being developed could take years to fruition. Yes. Okay. Fortunately, we have a good bunch of vaccines already, right? I had what seemed to be a sinus infection in June that ended up with blood clots in both lungs. Is it too late to determine if I had COVID? You could have an antibody test done to see if you have antibodies against the virus, against, say, the spike, or the nucleocapsid protein, assuming you haven't been vaccinated. Do you think we're going to see new COVID antivirals? Yes, there are a number of others being explored, other targets. I'm not sure, how they're going to end up, because it's hard to test them. You can't have a controlled population anymore once you have approved ones. It's more difficult. So there are in the pipeline, but when they will come if ever, I don't know. But they should be pushed. I think they should be pushed forward in case there's a future corona pandemic and they're active against them. Thank you, R.M. Holt, for your contribution. Really appreciate it. Do I recommend a booster for a teen who had 2 mRNA vaccines and COVID? No. No. You don't need it. You don't need it. In 1957 and 68 flu, and in 2009, an egg-based traditional flu vaccine was developed within a few months. Why wasn't it done this time with COVID? Well, we don't. The virus probably doesn't grow in eggs, and we don't make anything but flu vaccines in eggs. So that's why we had no experience with coronavirus vaccine growth in eggs. So with flu, we have plenty of experience, and that's why it was easy to slot it into that system, right? Is it possible to distinguish the case of Omicron or Delta and see if those people were vaccinated? It is possible, yes. You can definitely get that information. It probably is being collected somewhere. It was certainly collected in the Danish study. How long did it take you to start remembering your science training long term? This is a great question. So there are some things you remember because you use them over and over. And the things you use infrequently, you forget. So with me, I'm very lucky with virology because I wrote a textbook that gets revised every 5 years. And then I started teaching a virology course every year. So I know that stuff cold, and I change it to keep up every year. And so I can be pretty broad in virology because of that. But there are lots of, let's say, immunology. I do much less immunology. I have 2 lectures in my course. And so I remember the content of those 2 lectures, but things outside of that I don't remember because I don't use it as often. So that's the moral of the story. Just the stuff you use, and somehow if you can figure out how to think about things more often, then you'll remember them. I mean, just like computer stuff. I figure out a problem, and that's the end of it. And then 6 months later, I can't remember what I've done. I really should write it down, and I've taken to doing that. Okay, here's what I did to solve this problem. And then in 6 months, I can look at it. But then you have to remember where you wrote it, right? Does the vaccine also protect from the clotting issues? Yes, of course, the frequency of clotting is much higher for infection versus vaccination for those vaccines, mainly the adeno-vectored vaccines that cause the clotting side effects. So the frequency is much lower for them compared to COVID. It's not 0 for the vaccines, and that's a serious side effect that can kill you. But for COVID, it's much higher, and so that's the risk-benefit trade-off you make, okay? And if you don't want to do that, you could do another kind of vaccine. I got my Moderna booster in early September, but it was 100 mg, so not really a booster. Why was it so low? I think you're fine. I don't really think these amounts make much of a difference. You should go to your dentist. I was going to my dentist before I got a booster. Doesn't mean anything to you, but I think you're okay with the 100 milligrams. Thank you for your contribution. I really appreciate it. How much do you think the world's experience with SARS-CoV-2 will change how virologists approach the next major virus to emerge? It depends how long it is, right? Because there's some memory, but it doesn't last forever. Like in 1918 to now, there's nobody left from 1918, right? So we forgot a lot of the lessons. So I'm hoping that at least virologists will remember, and I think vaccinologists will remember too. The thing is, we could have been more ready for this pandemic with at least antivirals, if not broadly acting vaccines. And I'm hoping that so John Udell put it great. He said, we know the cost of this pandemic in money, in trillions of dollars, right? And so you can always go to Congress and say, look, the last pandemic cost this much. It trashed your economy for a while. You got to fund this research. I really think that science research is woefully underfunded in the U.S., which is what I'm familiar with. The NIH budget of $38 billion is not enough. There are a lot of projects that don't get done, and they're good, and they should be done because the funding selection process is flawed. So we need to fix that. Otherwise, no memory is going to help us go forward. Thank you, Doreen, for your contribution. Love 822 on the history of smallpox. Well, plague is bacteria, right? And that would be TWIM. We would do that on TWIM. And we have covered some plague stories on TWIM. You might want to check that out. I think TWIV listeners are better positioned to weigh in than Zuckerberg. Yeah, indeed. Yet he's got the megaphone. Although you have to say that Friedman did have me on, so that's good. Thank you, Ian, for your contribution. Is this analogy okay? Monoclonals are like a string of magnets. NS on virus is a complementary epitope. Changes may or may not affect efficacy. Or antibodies can be changed, but the monoclonals not. Well, the monoclonals can be changed. It just takes some time to make new ones, right? But we're much faster at changing the monoclonals. I think it's a fine analogy, yeah. A person walks into a bar. A person gets infected, then vaccinated. Is his immunity the same as the person would be vaccinated, then get the infection? Yes, it's the same. Yep. If vaccine efficacy wanes year after year and COVID is more serious if you're older, would it not make sense to wait until you're older to be vaccinated, like shingles? I don't think you should wait because then you're exposed, you're vulnerable to a serious infection, right? But I do think that you should, maybe in the elderly where it's contracting, you would want, it depends on whether disease goes up. I don't think it's an issue if this severe disease does not go up. And so there, in the elderly, they get higher dose flu vaccines as a consequence. So I think so far they're good with COVID, although, they're the suspect group because of the age that you have to be aware of. You have to, even if they're triple dosed, if they are infected and have some symptoms, you might want to give them monoclonals right away. So I do think that the elderly have to be looked at differently in terms of immunity. But so far, the vaccines are working in them, right? We don't have to do a higher dose or anything like that. If a hunter puts COVID-infected deer meat in the freezer, is the virus then not a worry? Well, if the virus will retain infectivity, yes. Now, of course, if you cook it, then you will cook the virus too. But, and of course, in the process of thawing the meat, you might infect yourself. So whether that happens, we don't know. Whether that's a concern, right? Because, I don't know, in a deer, do you you typically eat the muscle, right? You're not going to go into the respiratory tract where most of the virus is. But I don't know if that's flawed or not. We just don't know. So the cooking will get rid of infectivity. The problem is when you prep the meat, and that could be an issue. If HIV were a respiratory illness, none of us would have been there. Yes, but it's not. It's not compatible with the virus, and so it has to be transmitted in a way that's either sex or blood, right? So it's still bad, right? Because before we knew about it, it got transmitted extensively. I think the movie Outbreak is the cause of everyone thinking the virus could get more deadly. Yes, that is true. Outbreak was very popular, and that was a bogus thing where it got more virulent. Its R0 went up during the... I mean, that's just ridiculous. Maybe epidemiologists think about that too. I don't want to make fun of epidemiologists, but I think that's a good idea, David. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Ken, for your contribution. You have to use steroids later when you're past the viral phase and you're in the inflammatory phase, which is what you would use steroids for. So there is a viral phase where virus is reproducing. It goes down very quickly, and that's good because if you give steroids when the virus is high, it will keep high and you will be in trouble. So wait till the virus is down and you're entering an inflammatory phase where you have all the symptoms of that, lung issues, inability to breathe, need to be on high flow oxygen and so forth. All right, we have 4 minutes. Let's crank through the rest here and thank people who have contributed. This is the hardest part of the evening for me because I hate passing all these questions up. As a teacher, I want to answer all questions. Thank you, Michael. We appreciate your contribution. But I can't. This is the rest of your forever. Oh, that's a wonderful sentiment. I like that very much. It is. It is the rest of my forever. Thank you so much for that. Let's see. Thank you, Frank, for your contribution. How to protect little ones who cannot be vaccinated yet. Make sure they're masked and among people who are vaccinated, right? Don't let them be among people who are not. Now, their friends are not vaccinated, so they should be masked when they're playing with them. Any good books you can recommend for a teenager interested in biology to learn about virology? I would say you should pick up How Viruses Work, How Pathogenic Viruses Work by Lauren Sompirak. It's an inexpensive paperback that gets into the fundamentals, and I think it's pretty good. Don't let them read Hot Zone, because that's mostly fiction. So start with that one. And if they still like it, come back and I'll give you more. A lot of great questions here. Thank you, Environmental. Appreciate your contribution. I'm mostly patient, but sometimes I lose a bit, but not always. Udell advocated biofire when people were symptomatic. Yeah, I think biofire you typically get when you go into a healthcare facility, and because you just can't have it done on your own, right? Now tomorrow I have to go figure out what's wrong with Amy's computer because she has a really important interview Friday and it has to go well. Thank you, Hoplite, for your contribution. And you're welcome to all of you who thank me. I appreciate it. Pretty sure, and this is not for me, muscle cells do not make MHC2. Yeah, it doesn't matter. They can present antigen on MHC1, and they could be killed. But also, dendritic cells can pick up that antigen. It can grab it and bring it into the lymph node. Yeah. So here in Arizona, we are seeing outbreaks at facilities again with very high vaccine rates. So is it just infection or is it severe disease? That's an important distinction. If it's just infections, then it's not so important because most of the people will be asymptomatic or have sniffles, right? Siddhartha, thank you so much for your contribution. And that'll do it for another Q&A with A&V. Thanks to the moderators tonight, Les, Frank, Vanity, Tom, Steph. Thanks for being here and helping out. Thanks all of you for coming and contributing to this lovely community that we have here. And until next week, we'll be back next Wednesday. Be safe and good night. Bye-bye.